So, welcome to the session on workforce identity. So, this session is of course a bit different from the others. We're talking about how to enable people at their workplaces. And today we have 3 talks. We have Emile, who's going to talk about different personas people who work for us. And we have Lisa, who's going to talk about machine identities, how to handle them. And finally, we're talking about how to protect. Welcome. I hope everyone got some nice hot tea or hot coffee. Emile, let's get you started. Hopefully your slides are good.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining our session. Okay, so we've got like 3 people from 3 different organizations talking about workforce identity management, and hopefully that we can sort of exchange ideas on how we manage them and how we deal with this. So my name is Emile Parkin. I'm the head of IAM for Zalando. Just in case you missed the Black Friday thing, it's still Cyber Monday. Someone has to pay my salary, so thank you. So I'll talk about identity persona, so I'll get into what that means. Alright, so just a little bit about Zalando. We're like a company that sells mainly fashion-related products in 25 different countries. Big revenue number, like over 50 million customers. And yeah, so that's, I think a lot of people know who we are. So what I'll talk about today is how we approach managing these different personas. So internally, just to share a bit, we call these identity domains, but like the word domain can mean sort of different things. So for the sake of this discussion, I called it personas. So we have these different personas. Corporates is obviously employees. These are people that are paid to work full-time or part-time. Logistics would be either people working in our warehouse or people working in, for example, our couriers and DHL and those guys. Merchants are the people that sell their products on our platform. We also refer to them as partners. External users. I think external, these are contractors, contingents, like project workers, those guys. Help desk. Help desk is interesting for us because it's a business process outsourced setup. So we completely outsource the help desk function, and we call it the customer care function internally. So we don't call it help desk, but I just call it help desk. And then machine identities. These are not people. There are 2 groups excluded from this. One is our creative people. These are photographers, models, and those kind of people, but they're sort of managed in such a isolated, autonomous way that they don't kind of creep into our space. And then consumer identities. These are the 50 million active users. They're in a different team. So we're talking about workplace people, users today, so I excluded them. But that's sort of managed by a dedicated team that want to have extreme detailed and focused control over every aspect of the life cycle, so we don't manage those users. So these are just some numbers. We've got about 18,000 employees, a lot of merchant users, so these are number of users, not number of merchants. And you can see there's some other big numbers there as well. The question that I'm asking here is that if we want to manage these different identities, what are the questions we need to ask and what are the things we need to consider to manage these identities effectively, given that they are different types? So things that we look at is data management, so the data model, the attributes, all of these things. Data quality, the lifecycle management, so how clearly can we define different stages of the lifecycle from onboarded, employed, and then eventually terminated and post-termination. Processes, what are some of the processes and interactions, like maybe there needs to be password resets or someone needs to give them a token or something. Governance, what are the requirements around governance, either legal requirements or internal requirements. Security risks, like what's the impact if it's compromised. Permissions management, how do we manage the roles and permissions within this space for this persona. And the last two are fairly self-explanatory, authentication and authorization. So what are the mechanisms that we can use to manage these different personas and identities? So I won't go into detail on all of these. The point here is mostly to explain differences and how these are managed. So for corporate identities, for example, the data management and the lifecycle management should be good because the data should come from an HR system and the processes should be closely aligned to HR processes. So pre-hire, hire, maybe they do an internal transfer or promotion, eventually pre-termination, termination, post-termination. These are like nicely defined steps. So that should work well for employees, especially full-time employees. Where things get a little bit trickier is processes. It's not because the processes are too challenging, it's just that there are a lot of exceptions. Well, not a lot, but too many exceptions. So there's always maybe some person is maybe starting relatively quickly and then that process needs to be fast-tracked, or someone needs to reset their password immediately and they've got some challenges. So processes are not unmanageable, but challenging. So governance and risk, these are where you really see for employees, there's a lot of focus on this. People need to know what are they doing. There's audits, there's Zalando, for example, is also has a bank license because we have a subsidiary called Zalando Payments. They need to comply to both German and European laws and regulations, so there's a lot of compliance requirements. And then security risk, of course, if there's a compromise, this could be potential financial impact. But for authentication, because we issue everyone with devices, phones and laptops, we can really give them strong authentication. So we use MFA and passkeys. That's what Ashwin will talk about later. Okay, authorization, we really focus on doing fine-grained authorization within our organization to really give people only the access that they need for what they need to do. So logistics is different because there's a high churn. These are the people that work in the warehouse, so they they kind of come and go as they, not as they please, but there's a lot of in and out. So, revolving door, people are continuously coming in. They are also usually just the information is captured by the physical facility premium security team, so it's not going through like an authoritative source, it's just the security guys that capture that information. So there's a lot of challenges with this. The one thing that we are okay with is permissions management, because we know for someone who scans returns, for example, we know exactly what they should have access to, and they only do that, and it's clearly defined, there's almost no exceptions. But authentication, authorization is a challenge because they don't have phones and laptops and tokens, so oftentimes these are very low-tech solutions to authentication and even authorization. Merchants, there we rely on external people to manage the data, so someone else provides information for our partner users. It's delegated. Yeah, so there's some things that work well here. Permissions and authorization is also working well. We actually, for most of our merchants, we require MFA as well, which I think is interesting because that means that these merchants are using MFA strong authentication to access our platform. External identities. Here if you think about how this is applied in your organization, it's also different in how you interface with externals. And you might not even be able to, or it might not make sense to put all the externals into one bucket. So like contractors, contingents, like business process outsourcing, it might not all fit into this mold, but the challenges is also you're reliant on external people to provide identity, like data. You might also outsourcing the lifecycle management and processes in often cases. So there's also some challenges there. Again, for authentication, that's one area that works well here because we are also able to give them or require them to use MFA. But everything else we sort of challenged with. The help desk users, this is probably the one group of users or persona that we can manage the best because they are issued devices that are controlled and managed by us. They only access like 2 applications, like CRM and one other application. We know exactly what they need to do. We know exactly what access they need. So this is probably the group that's the easiest and most reliable with the least amount of exceptions that we manage. So that's more green on this slide. And then lastly, machine identities, which Lisa will talk about as well. Here we see some interesting things. So the bottom 3, managing the permissions, the authentication and authorization, there we have like really good control over and insight. So we know exactly which systems each machine identity needs to access, why they need to access it, and so on. The way that they authenticate, strong authentication, OAuth and OIDC and all these strong authentication methods. It's also fine-grained access that we apply in these cases, and the processes are well defined. It's just that how these accounts are created, where the data comes from, and especially also governance. How do we validate and review that these machine identities still need the access that they currently have? That review process is challenging because you need to ask a human to validate it. You can't just ask another system yet. I guess AI will solve all our problems. But okay, so the point behind all of that is just all of these things are managed slightly differently. So the question is, what should I consider when managing these different personas? Again, this is sort of from my perspective, and the point, as you might have assumed from looking at that, is like assumptions is also a challenge here. So you can't just assume you can manage all these types of identities in the same way. They're managed in different ways. So here are my sort of quick cheat sheet on how to try to approach this. So not all of these identities are created equal. So in what I showed in the previous slide, some of them have some aspects that are easier to manage and some aspects that are not. And there's challenges on each of them. So you need to understand that each of these personas, or as we call them, identity domains, have different challenges. They also have different requirements in terms of governance and reporting and so on. There are also some cases where they overlap. So we have, for example, people in our corporate identity space that also need access to our merchant applications. And we have externals that also need access to the same set of applications and roles that our internal corporate employees have. So these overlap, and that creates a challenge as well. This is a principle that's really challenging to define the IAM policy and enforce it. So, because often when you go to application owners and you say, like, you have to follow this life cycle, you have to follow this process, you need to have this minimum set of data, or like one that we struggled with in the past, it's like, what do you use as a username? Is it the email address? Is it something else? Like, you need to sort of enforce the standard, otherwise you'll just drown in all the nuance and exceptions. To have the clear distinction of personas, that means that it should be very clear. If you're looking at a user account, you should be able to very quickly understand what persona that user account belongs to. Corporate or external, for example. Processes, yeah, so I'll skip that one. Exceptions is also important. So what I've learned, even though I'm sort of a purist type of person, there's always exceptions, which is annoying. But if you kind of know upfront that there will be exceptions, you can plan for it and you can deal with it, and it sort of still falls within your framework. So whether it's external, which their contract might be renewed last minute and now they need to have another 3 months extension, and someone calls you like you have to activate this account immediately because he's staying, as long as you kind of consider that in your exceptions, then at least you have an approach. So the last point, we have an interesting sort of hub and spoke model where we have an identity provider. We use Okta as our identity provider. We've got identity providers focus on each of these domains. So we've got one for corporate, one for merchants, another for logistics and so on. And that initially seemed like overcomplicating things, but actually that helped us in the long term because now we've got these, firstly from a security perspective, these users and these groups of users are very isolated, so you can't creep from one system to another system for lateral movement. But also it helps keep things clean and clear, so you can define simple policies for a set of users that doesn't need to apply to everyone. And it also makes it easier for managing these exceptions. But that might not always be possible to have these different identity providers, but the point is more that you can think about how do you separate the actual controls and the mechanisms for making these changes for these different types of users. That's all.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa, and I am a senior product manager for Rabobank. And coincidentally, if you don't know where Rabobank is, you just need to look behind you. It's the shiny two towers over there, so it's very recognizable. And today, I would like to spend the next 15 minutes with you to talk about, well, the rise of the machine identities and why this is important for workforce IAM. And I've started experimenting with Copilot arts with, putting illustrations together. Apparently, this is a presentation of robots wondering about their identities. So, just want to give myself a quick self-introduction. So, my name is Lisa. I have a professional identity, which I mentioned, which is the senior product manager for IAM for engineering for Rabobank. I will go into why we call ourselves IAM for engineering in another moment. But I also have a personal identity. So I am a wife, I am a mom of 4 kids, plus 2 stepkids and 2 kids of my own, and 2 dogs and 2 cats. So everything in my life comes with 2. I don't have 2 husbands though, just 1. But my life is quite busy with all the dogs and cats and kids. So I'm originally from Taiwan, but I actually grew up in Canada. So I moved to Canada when I was 11. And after I graduated from university, I decided to take a gap year to Singapore, and that turned into 7 years. But then I also moved over to the Netherlands in 2017. So I also have moved around a bit in my life. So cultural identity is also sometimes I also ponder, who am I? Where am I coming from? But I've also been working in the IAM field since 2014. So I work across the various industry sectors. So I also work in consultancy for a large portion of my professional life, but also worked in products and now also in the financial sector. So I just want to give you a quick, some facts about Rabobank. So I think in Netherlands, Rabobank is known as the farmers' bank. That has a reason behind it. It's because in the 19th century, it really started with a bunch of farmers who actually wanted to modernize. There had been calls that they wanted to modernize their infrastructure, modernize the way they think about farming. And they actually all got together and actually started sort of a corporation. So what they do is that they actually deposit a lot of savings into the corporations. They're not really stockholders, but they're really board members. And they really work together to make sure that they use their funds in the right way collectively to actually help foster the group. So that grew and grew and grew, and eventually it really came to the culmination of what is now called Rabobank. And now we're actually active within 37 countries with 47,000 employees. And then I think internationally, we're still known for more agriculture, but then within the Netherlands, obviously, we'd have the core banking solutions, and we also have the sister entities such as Opvion, DLL, that deals with more leasing, also with mortgage providers. And I also just want to talk a bit about where we are in terms of IAM within Rabobank. So in Rabobank, we work in agile. So that means everything is a tribe, everything is squads, and we work in a very nice ecosystem. And where I belong is in the tribe IAM. This is quite distinct from, this is specifically dealing with workforce IAM. We also have a completely different tribe called digital platforms that work with our core banking solutions. So these are the ones that are really dealing with the customer IAM side of things. But where we are from is really dealing with workforce. And we're divided into 5 different entities. So we have chapter IAM, which is meant to be the linking bridge, which is why there's an icon, that talks between the business with an IAM. So they are the external consultants who talk to the business, get their requirements, and the requirements are supposed to come in within our IAM group. And then they also are the kind of the public face towards our legislators and auditors. We also have the area IAM for employees, which is the ones that actually are dealing primarily with the core IGA side of things, so really dealing with business roles, interacting with HR. An area called IAM Data and Insights, and these are the ones that are creating the actionable insight reports for us, so make sure that we actually comply, are able to provide data reporting for our auditors and also for other parties that may want to use an IAM solution for other beings. We have also area called IAM Foundation, which is really that we want to start using the identity fabric, you might have heard of this term, to really serve the core of IAM. So we have a shared platforms model in which the core IGA solution actually sits under foundations, and then they really are more, they drive the infrastructure and engineering behind the IGA side of things, and eventually they will cover more grounds of IAM. Where I come from is the IAM for engineering, which I think is the coolest out of the 5, but I might be biased. And what do? So our purpose is actually to provide reliable, seamless, and secure IAM solution to our 8,000 engineers within the bank. So they're either working in the Netherlands or they're working globally. But our primary service is to serve them. So these are the DevOps engineers who may want access to the more privileged access, for example. And they're also the machines. So when you talk about API, provisioning, service accounts, those type of things, these also then come into our radar as the IAM for engineering. And we really want to make sure we enable IAM for them to be low cognitive load, because the engineers, the most often complain is IAM is too complicated. We enforce too much controls, too much restrictions for them to really work creatively. So we want to make sure that we really enable a safe playing field for them that is compliant by nature, but also doesn't limit their creativity and flexibility when it comes to creating DevOps work for our customers. So I said that we also deal with machine identity. So what is a machine identity? And I will use machine identity and non-human identity kind of interchangeably throughout this presentation, because there's not a lot of agreements within the industry as to what to call it. Some people call it machine identity, people call it NHIs, non-human identity, so I will just call it whatever. So machine identity is basically just fundamentally, it's basically anything that is not a human. So the cold body identity, that's what we call it. So they are not associated or by a human, and they can also be automatically created and terminated by demand to scale and meet the need of the business. And illustratively, if you look at here, this is a picture of a Gartner. So we have the traditional human identity, which is then the employees, the partners, the customers, the vendors, and the consultants. So your typical B2E, B2C, B2B type of population, which Emile also explained very nicely in his presentation. And you also have the machine side of things. So machine identities are generally categorized in two major categories. So you have the devices. So these devices are your endpoint devices. There's mobile, desktop, and then you also have the workloads. So these are the ones that actually we focus more in IAM for engineering, because these are actually what we see ones that require access, at least from an IT infrastructure perspective, that needs access to another asset. So we focus more on the workload identities. But then the definition of the workload identity is also not so consistent across the industry. So, but then typically these are your APIs, your service accounts, your RPA robots, your VMware containers for your CI/CD pipelines. So these are the typical what you call the workload identity. But what they do is basically they identify, authenticate, and allow authorizations for machines to talk to each other. And then, you find it anywhere now within applications, within cloud, and also within your on-prem infrastructure as well. So what is the primary difference between human identity versus a machine identity? So I think, Emile, you also touch upon some of the complexities between managing the both. But what we see is for human identities, when you talk about the growth, there is it's manageable. Like you have people onboarding, you have people offboarding, but at least that is manageable in a sense of pace. But what we see in today's digital world, the world of the number of machine identity is exponentially growing. So I think now there is a figure that is about every one human identity, there is 45 times more machine identity that exists in the IT side of things. So you're dealing with exponential growth. And why? This is also because the way that IT is now digitalized, we're moving towards the cloud, and there's also a lot of DevOps work that's happening within the our field of expertise. So machine identities, given the pace of automation, is also growing. And when you talk about governance, what we see within human IGA, for majority enterprises, it is quite centralized. You have your IGA solutions, such as your SailPoint, One Identity Savient, that is doing your identity governance for you, and also do a lot of lifecycle management and also monitoring. But then with machine identity, we see that it's actually quite decentralized. So we have also engineers creating their own development accounts. And typically, these are just created within their own infrastructure. It's not centralized at all. So there's typically not a single pane of glass in which you can say, this is where all my machine identity exists within my organization. Within human identity is also clear ownership and context. For example, if I were to be birthed right into the Rabobank role, I'm Lisa Kuhl, I have a certain role, and I usually have a pretty defined permissions as to what I should be doing within the IT landscape. But then with machine identity, the ownership is often not really clear, because you have either machine identities that's created by applications, or you have machine identities that's created by the shared platform. And it is often quite a gray line between, who owns then this machine identity? And it's also exacerbated by the fact that it's decentralized governance. So a lot of times that people created identity and they forget about it. And lastly, I think with a human identity, it's created by known entities. So usually, if you don't have shadow IT, you have the HR and IAM that's centralizing provisioning of these identities. But then with machine identities, it's, created by everyone. There is no strict governance yet as to how these machine identities are typically provisioned in your landscape. But what we are also seeing now is that breaches that involve machine identity is on the rise. And what I have here is just a tiny snippet of breaches that happened in 2024. So Cisco actually suffered a major data breach in October of this year because of that. I think there was exposed credential that was published, and then the hacker actually gained access to the development hub, which is their public development hub that is for third parties, and they actually managed to get access to a lot of their API keys or tokens. So that is a massive data breach. And also for the New York Times, I think they also had the exposed credential that was, this was actually from a GitHub access token that were exposed, and then therefore that token was the hacker was able to use a token to get access to the production environment and also extract a lot of the data from the company itself. But I won't go into details of everything, but I think the message is clear that hackers are not only just utilizing human identities anymore to get into their infrastructure, they're actually now targeting non-human identities. And why? Because majority of the time, this non-human identity is not governed properly, it is not stored properly, there is also not an elevated authentication into those accounts. So if you manage to get access to the username and secret, you can just get in, no questions asked. And why is managing machine and non-human identity challenging? So I think I also mentioned that the volume of managing machine identities makes it quite challenging. So yeah, if for every one human identity, there's 45 times more of machine identity, and we all know how hard it is already to manage human IGA now, yeah, it's also difficult to track. And from a definition perspective, where do you start then managing machine identities? Because you have the traditional system accounts, but what about the API keys? What about the OAuth tokens? What about the certificates? How do you centralize and manage all of that? So this actually, yeah, becomes quite a big challenge. And also, yeah, majority of the organization just do not keep a record of all the machine identity that's provisioned within the landscape, so that the accurate inventory to even start looking at it from a centralized way is actually impossible. From a security compliance perspective, yeah, authentication for machines are difficult in the sense that you can't give a machine an MFA to do step-off authentication. So you need to start thinking of other ways. So for example, we see that majority of the machine identities are secrets-based, and we actually say to our organization, this is something we're trying to also elevate within Rabobank, that if the secret authentication should be the least preferred out of all the authentication methods within machine authentication. Why? Secrets are more easily exposed. So we actually encourage them to, if they can, to actually look into other authentication methods, so such as token authentication or using certificate authentication, because these are by far more secure than secrets. But we also know that secrets are inevitable, so we also then have vaulting mechanisms to make sure that at least the secret is secured in a proper way. Yeah.
Excuse my ignorance, but what is secret-based?
Secret-based is just for example, a private key that's associated with the machine identity. Yeah. And then, yeah, machine identities are often or not more granted with excess privileges. So, yeah, if you have a developer that just wants to develop something quickly, more often or not, they'll just have elevated privileges into the production environment. So that's often not secured. And also, yeah, you cannot apply security policies as uniformly as you would in a human identity way, just because it's just no single centralized governance towards machine identity. So from the control perspective, it is difficult to to implement RBAC or even PBAC for that matter. Ownership is difficult as well because it's just not inherently clear towards as to where the account came from, who provisioned it, and why. So recently, we're actually running a very big discovery program within our bank, and more often than not, it's a dialogue between the application and also the platform, the shared platform provider, because when you discover an account, they have no clue and they point fingers at each other and say, "Oh, this account doesn't belong to me." So who does it belong to then? So we see a lot of these cases that accounts just get provisioned, it gets forgotten, and then the ownership is lost. And this obviously then exacerbates the increased attack surface, because then if you have a lot of machine identities that's just left there, then it's open for hackers to exploit and potentially gain access to your system. And with Rabobank, it's a headache for us because we are a bank and we are at the mercy of the ECB. And if ECB or our auditors sense that we do not have control, then we lose our license to operate, because obviously with a bank, we have a social responsibility to make sure that we have a secure infrastructure since we're storing money for our customers. So all this makes it quite difficult for us to control, because we know that non-human identity pose an inherent risk. So To tackle this, we must, so maybe first thing is we're also just in the kind of starting out of this program as well, to start looking into machine management in a very cohesive way. So there's several aspects that we are considering, but then I think also just first note is we don't have all the answers. So we are also looking into other different aspects we need to consider. And if there are more also in this audience, I would love to hear your ideas. So at least for now, what we're thinking about is, well, one is that we must invest in a comprehensive discovery capability, because without understanding what you have in your landscape, you cannot start actually controlling. So we must be able to discover, look into the servers, look into the application to understand what exactly is in our landscape. Then we can actually start looking into how to manage together. Tool selection for the issuance of the full lifecycle management of machine identities. So as of now in the industry, there isn't a single technology or tool that is able to manage comprehensively how to manage identities. So we must also discuss with our vendors, with our partners as to, well, what capabilities and use cases should we prioritize to start looking into how to streamline the management approach for machine identities. We're also investing into looking into how we can actually have a single source of truth for all machine identities so we can start centralizing governance. We don't know yet whether we want to just have it as a pass-through registration, or if we also want to start provisioning and deprovisioning the accounts. There's pros and cons for which. So we're also looking into how we're, propose this towards the company. Ownership definition, so who owns what machines, becomes really important, because if you don't have an owner, I think Emile also said this, you must be able to tie a machine identity with a human, because then the human can take a responsibility and make certain actions. So we must be able to tie at least a machine identity towards a human entity in order for this to actually work. And we also want to start automating a lot of this lifecycle management and title management for machine identities. Why? Because, for example, if you don't manage certificates properly, you lead to blackout occasions. There's a lot of different instances actually involving certificates that have been forgotten in terms of people forget to renew, and then it actually causes massive blackouts within the systems. And this is not something that Rabobank doesn't want, because if it starts affecting our Rabobank app, then we have a huge issue, and obviously that gets on front page news of the Netherlands. And then we also want to start strengthening authentication methods for the machine-to-machine communication. So I already mentioned this before. We want to promote as much certificate-based authentication and token-based authentication as possible, but we also will offer then the secret vaulting capabilities. And lastly, start building your machine identity management framework based on IAM capabilities. And what I mean by that is, I think, although I mentioned human and machines have their inherent differences. So for example, you have your humans that are birthright usually from the HR source, so you have HR system. Sometimes, more often than not, it's not completely accurate. You can also start tracking the birthright of your machine identities with CMDB, although what we see that most often than not, it's not comprehensive. There's always something missing. And then you also have your access requests and your DevOps tooling container integration to find out how machines and humans, machines will use then the machine to talk to each other, and humans will use access requests to talk to each other. And then there's also different type of authentication methods. So with humans, usually we use single sign-on, and then with machines, we use key management, certificate management. But we see also commonalities in which we can start building a comprehensive machine management framework. So we can start looking into the identity lifecycle event, and we can start looking into privilege access management, entitlements workflow. We also want to look into just-in-time and zero standing privileges for our machine identities, because we don't want machines to have just standing privileges around. We know that from a zero trust framework perspective, we want to start looking into more just-in-time or ephemeral access for accounts. We want to be able to do recertification processes and also discovery. So if you discover an account, we want to make sure that there's also a way in which we can tie the ownership back and also be able to certify the existence of this identity. And then secret vaulting and also KIM. But these are all, I think, items in which humans and machines then have in common that we can start leveraging in order to build a comprehensive framework to manage the machines. So some key takeaways. So machine identities are here to stay, and in today's environment, it will only grow. And we need to really start, machine identity management cannot be overlooked because of the inherent risks that it poses to organizations. It must be considered as a key identity group in building a zero trust identity fabric, which I think I'm glad Zalando does. And machine identity and human identities have fundamental differences, and this all leads to unique challenges and aspects to consider for your IAM strategy. And centralized governance, at least that's what we're looking at, will be instrumental for the effective management, and also what I feel a starting point for machine identities. And I think also currently, no matter what your vendors say, there is no single tooling that actually manages all the capabilities. So I think the implementation and selection of technology must be carefully balanced with the use cases that your organization wants to prioritize, and also, whether or not the technology you select is of strategic fit to the organization. And lastly, also, I think utilize the known IAM building blocks when designing your framework. So in the previous slide, look into the common capabilities that human and machines have, and then start building your framework from there. I didn't mention the last point, but I think it's also important to make sure that whatever IAM solution that you design for your machine identity, remember your key population, which is the users and DevOps engineers that work with these machine identities. Because it's not about controlling them, and it's about making sure that they have a secure and compliant, let's just say, playing field for them to for them to work. So it's also important to make sure that whatever solution you design, you also obviously soundboard with your user group to make sure that it's also usable for them. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and if there's any other questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Very interesting. I was wondering what your vision is on the accountability of the actions machines do using their identity.
Well, can you elaborate with your question?
Well, if you give an identity to a machine, you give it with a specific purpose, so it can perform actions on behalf of somebody. And usually, if a human performs an action on behalf of an organization or another human, there's there's somebody accountable for it. In your story, it struck me that everybody can create machine identities, and they roam the world of the Rabobank freely, and nobody's accountable for their actions. Is that correct?
No, I think it's one way to interpret it, but I think what we want to do is to make sure that whatever machine identity is provisioned, there is a human identity associated with it, because these are the ones that you can actually make accountable of. So I think it's not that all the accounts, machine identities is running Rabobank freely. It's not like that, but I think it's just to make sure that there is a ability to certify and also to track back what the accountability is with the human identity. Yeah, because now it's not so inherently visible.
And that's currently not the case in Rabobank, isn't it?
We want to make it more finite and more black and white. So we see a lot of gray areas sometimes, but then we want to make sure that it's not really a discussion, it's more of a clear accountability whenever there's a machine identity involved.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions?
Thank you so much. Could you please clarify some little bit technical details, like which one identity provider IAM solution you are using, which one authorization models, just a little bit insights. It's like your own solution or this is third party?
I have to tell you, we're currently looking at business cases in terms of business partners and technology partners. So we haven't made our mind yet. We have a interim solution as to how we're controlling these machine identities, but we also see the limitation of it. So we're currently in the strategic forming phase in order to find how we want to implement technology to move this proposal forward.
Hi.
Hi.
Great presentation, by the way. So to me, a lot of this NHI or machine identity looks like an evolution of privileged access management in a way. But there are a lot of vendors coming in the market just calling, I'm an NHI vendor. So what do you think they are doing better, more transformationally compared to the old players of the PAM market? If there is some features or capabilities that they really had the luxury of building ground up, so now they're better, and they might be, in the future, even better than the legacy PAM players.
Yeah, I think I have been speaking to a lot of new NHI players lately, but they really focus a lot more on discovery. So what we see, a lot of the new NHI players, they actually have a more comprehensive discovery capability to make sure at least that all the machine identity you find is registered and also tied in with a clear owner. But then with the traditional PAM, I am seeing that they're also starting to move towards that trend, because with CyberArk, for example, they have now partnered up with Benify, and they also want to make sure that they start looking into the comprehensive machine identity management side of things. So they are looking into it, but I think with PAM market still, that they are still more focused on privileged accounts, in which we know that not all machine identities are. So I think PAM solutions have their own benefits in terms of making sure that the session recording, passwords are rotated, etc. But it's not all applicable to machine identities. So I think this is where the key differences lie. And there's also stretches in terms of how much scalability there are in terms of the PAM solutions and also the new NHI solutions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So should we call the machine identity systems the non-PAM then, the non-privileged?
Don't get me started on the nomenclature. There's a lot of arguments about these kind of things.
So thank you very much. I'd like to give.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, as the today's topic, it's mainly about the workforce IAM. We touched upon the IAM personas by Emile, and then we touched about the machine identities by Lisa. Now we delve into more about the workforce, the critical things about the critical accounts, how do we protect them with phish-resistant MFA. So this is a topic that we want to spend some time on today to understand protecting the most important accounts with phishing-resistant MFA. So I want to just put a plus mark here. I would say why. By the end of the talk, we can know more about that one. So who I am. I'm Ashwin Bonup. I'm the product specialist from IKEA. And I've been working in IAM for almost more than 10 years now. And I help IKEA to build the solutions mainly based on the Entra ID and Microsoft security, and to address the requirements from the stakeholders to get them into everyday life better. And I'm a small part of the journey of IKEA, where we have a mission to make better lives for everyone. Okay, so let's get straight into the onset of the high privileged accounts. As we all know, as in today's growing, evolving landscape, digital landscape, most of the accounts are getting compromised, and for attackers' point of view, they are mainly behind the high privileged accounts. Why? Because they have the administrative access to the systems, and they have the access to the critical data in the organization, and they are called the crown jewels of any organization. So currently, the traditional IAM security measures or the security measures are increasingly inadequate to protect these accounts. Therefore, the phishing resistance MFA comes into picture, which is one of the more secure methods to protect the privileged high accounts in any organization. So why attackers are behind compromising the high privileged accounts? Because of the weak links we put into the security that they compromise to gain for the financial loss, or even to jeopardize the organization brand and what's so not. And due to the increasing landscape of the cyber threat, these attacks are happening more often than required, and the attackers are behind the critical accounts in an organization. To protect this, there are no silver bullet and there's no solution for all, but some of them, like we can at least say from a cyber defense perspective, what are the strong links to protect them from being attacked by the attackers? We do have a strategy at IKEA that split into two. That means if you're a normal coworker at IKEA, we have the email collaboration on that account. And if the same person happens to be an admin in any of the systems, in this case, let's say Enter ID, we say that, okay, you get your own coworker account, and you also get your admin account, which is it starts with IDM. It has no collaboration in picture. That means these accounts are at least being saved by the email phishing attacks. So that's one of the strong links. And each and every ADM account should have at least a strong authentication, not just with password plus MFA, but a password plus a phishing-resistant MFA, at least to start with as a first line of defense. And then on top of the traditional security measures, there's also good to have the effective security measures that we delve into more in the next slides. So this has been sourced from the recent Microsoft Digital Defense Report 2024. The identity attacks are on the rise. Why? And we always see that threat actors are always ahead of the cyber defense because of the increasing threat landscape. As Microsoft has said from the Microsoft Threat Intelligence, more than 99% of the identity attacks are password-based attacks still. And on the other side of this track, the other attacks are mainly the MFA attacks, which consist of MFA fatigue attacks, SIM swapping, and also adversary in the middle attack. And the other half of the 1% is the post-authentication attacks and also infrastructure compromise, where the statewide actors or the cyber criminals are mainly behind or against the compromising the infrastructure of any organization for the financial gains or for other matters. Why identity attacks are more than 99%? Due to the predictable human behaviors that as we humans, we create the same guess passwords for all, and it is also sometimes we create the same passwords for multiple websites, and we fall prey for the phishing attacks. Because of the power of the AI and quantum computing in today's world, it is next to impossible to find out if it is a genuine email or a phishing email. So for that, phishing attacks are still the predominant attacks in the identity-based attacks. How does the current cyber threat landscape look like? As we just seen in the other slide, most of the 99% of the attacks are identity-based and password-based attacks. Microsoft says that compared to 2023 MDDR report, which is Microsoft Digital Defense Report, it's more challenging, complex, and increasingly dangerous if they currently see the 2024 landscape. Why do they say that? Because the attackers and the cyber threat criminals, they are getting better resourced because of the power of AI and also leveraging the better techniques and tactics to even encounter the strongest cyber defense in any organization. That's wherein they are ahead of us in getting compromised the critical accounts, or for that matter, even any normal account. As per the report, it says 600 million attacks every day on the Microsoft customers. And out of that, it's the report from the Microsoft Intelligence, which has a diverse attack surface ranging from identity, phishing, and ransomwares. If we take a sneak about the MFA attacks in perspective, as I said, it's mainly about the SIM swapping, MFA fatigue, and adversary in the middle attack. As we all know, at least the SIM swapping has seen the reduced in the declining, because I think I would say from Microsoft perspective, 40% of the organizations have moved away from password plus SMS to password plus strong authentication, which is a good sign from the one side. But on the other side, since we moved from 40% of the organization moved from strong authentication, that 40% has now been seeing less of a SIM swapping attack, but more often MFA fatigue and AITM attacks, which is, if we can only sneak about the AITM, it has increased 146% from 2023, which is huge concern for any organization to build their cyber defense. So the main message here is, how do we defend against the token theft and adversary in the middle attack for the main high critical or the crown jewels of any organization for their digital world? So these are main, that's wherein I said MFA plus. So this concerns that it is not only that if critical accounts are protected with the phish-resistant MFA, that we are safe, it's a one silver bullet and we are safe from any phishing attacks. No, that's not the message I wanted to give it today here. These are the measures which can be delved into a multiple phases, but within first line of defense, a second line of defense, or a third line of defense, where token binding is one of them. As we all know, phish resistant is not completely a foolproof solution, where token theft are still on the rise. If I'm not wrong, it is 39,000 token theft per day as per Microsoft intelligence report. 39,000. And Microsoft has moved 70% ahead on stopping the password-based attacks from 4,000 in 2023 to 7,000 per day, 7,000 per second in 2024. That means the cyber defense is also growing with the power of AI, but hackers are ahead of the cyber defense. Token binding, as we all know, Microsoft is working very closely on this space. Currently, the token binding or the token protection, as we also call it as token proof of possessions, which mainly works for the Windows clients in today's world. Microsoft is working in a public preview right now where they want to enable this or extend this evolution to other cross-platforms, web applications, and supported infrastructure beyond Microsoft. So token binding, if you're a Microsoft customers, which is a good measure to go with the token binding, where you protect the token in your device and create a conditional access policy. That means if an adversary in the middle attack or a phishing attack is being played by a token replay, that should be invalidated because the token is not generated from the legitimate device, but the hacker is trying to replay the attack from the unmanaged device. So that's the point I wanted to say here. On the second one, that's the first line of defense. If it's possible, the organization can take that as a cyber defense strategy. If not, the first line of defense plus the partial defenses could be all your admins accessing the critical resources should only be done from the managed and compliant device. Bottom line. No other unmanaged device. They would say that, no, my laptop is not working today. Can I access my admin privileges from my personal laptop? No, you're not allowed to do that. So that's the second factor. As if your admins are mainly on the Windows, the credentials guard for the Windows users is one of the other strategic methods for cyber defense point of view. From Windows 11 plus, it is a default setting on. If not, this can be enabled through your Intune or with your registry or with your GPO. Apart from these three, we can also create a risk-based profile conditional access policies. If for any other reason, if a token is being replayed, then your Entra ID protection or Microsoft Defender can monitor this risk profiles, like it can raise out an anomalous token or an unfamiliar sign-in properties and directly point out to your cybersecurity that, hey, this tier 0 or tier 1 account is being used or accessed from an unfamiliar location, which is not trusted network. Then those logs can be streamlined to your SIM solution, which is Microsoft Sentinel or any other. That can be triggered, and we can enforce a policy where such triggers can eventually ask the user to re-authenticate with a strong password or strong authentication or the phish-resistant authentication. And again, the token binding protection and also continuous access evaluation. It's mainly supports for the Microsoft clients. If it is supported, Microsoft is slowly evolving more onto this one to add on to the continuous access evaluation, which is a really good technique to block or defend the token attacks and the adversary in the middle attacks. Now come to the point, how to protect better the admin accounts in your organization, which is mainly the gatekeepers of your digital world of your organization. As I said, the topic is mainly about the phish-resistant MFA plus. I'm repeating myself from the previous slide. This compliant device. Make sure only the tier 0, tier 1 accounts will be accessing from a trusted network and trust networks and not from any other networks. And the other one, which is really good and it's caught my eyes, like we should also consider leveraging privileged access workstations, which is a cutting edge technology provided by Microsoft, which is device bound to our tier 0 and tier 1 accounts, completely hardened from a security standpoint, device bound, and also has a better TPM protected for the tier 0 accounts. And of course, as we all know, the power of the conditional access policies, tier 0, tier 1 accounts with a persona-based authentication can be completely managed, where some of the first line, second line defense can be easily been strategized, and you can reduce the false positive signals on your SecOps tools to leverage the persona-based authentication. As we all know, these are the 5 supported passwordless solutions from Microsoft and other vendors, which is Windows Hello for Business. As we all know, this has been there for quite some time now, but Microsoft is also going into preview with platform credentials for Mac OS, where it's currently in preview. But good news is that passkeys for Microsoft Authenticator is available now, which has been released or announced 2 to 3 weeks ago, if I'm not wrong. But if you could see, Microsoft has initially been saying this news that we will go live or we will go GA in March or Jan 2025. But why they had to do this in December or let's say November 2nd week or 3rd week? Because Microsoft also thinks that doing this ahead of time would at least reduce their cyber defense from the intelligence standpoint. So they have put passkeys into general availability in Microsoft Authenticator way before what they weren't expecting it to be. And Microsoft Authenticator for app passkeys, which we see more into the next slides, and FIDO2 security keys. If your organization network landscape or the infrastructure landscape does not support Microsoft Authenticator on passkeys, then go for the hardware keys with FIDO2, especially for your tier 0, tier 1, and also for your emergency accounts or the admin accounts. These are the passwordless authentication options from Entra mainly, and these are the 3 main supported solutions for the phish-resistant MFA, where we say again, Hello for Business, Microsoft Authenticator app for FIDO2, or FIDO2 security keys. I'm just rushing because of the time. Now, how do we enable passkeys for your organization? Before that, you need to prep up your thing. How do we do that? So for the initial requirements is your tier 0, tier 1 account should already be on the strong MFA methods. Then you should also run a query or a report that FIDO2 security keys are eligible for attestation. There's a setting in the Microsoft Entra that it should be enforced for yes. And then the device support for your admin accounts. Of course, they should be managing from compliant device and registered device from Intune, but also their mobile devices should also have a registered and compliant with Android 14 plus, 14 or plus, or iOS 17 or later. How do we enforce phish-resistant MFA for the author administrators? Microsoft has got a really good technique which to do that, that's called authentication strength, where we create an authentication strength in the Microsoft Entra ID admin portal, mark them to the Entra ID directory roles, and enable the phone sign-in or the Microsoft passkeys for authenticators, that whenever the tier 0, tier 1 accounts are accessing Entra ID resources, they should only be authenticated with passkeys. Plus one to that, we can also leverage PAM tools, where we did a rollout on that one. Let's say tier 0 accounts of the Entra ID, let's say global admin or privileged role administrator, they will be accessing the CyberArk portal with their ADM account, check in with CyberArk with their functional account, and that functional account will have 0 privileges on standing. They would come to the PIM tool, elevate their account, authenticate, get it approved by their manager or the approval on the PIM, do the phish-resisting MFA, get onto the Entra ID portal, do their session, which is privilege recorded, and come back and the session was completed. That's one of the strategies we took and which is going well according to the plan with less of hassle on that one, I would say. Now, how are we overcoming the challenges of passkey implementations? As I said, there is always a risk of legacy systems and the compliance of the requirements. As Microsoft is saying, use latest versions and latest iOS or platforms for your end users, especially for your administrators. That's mainly a bigger project in itself, that how do we comply that the admins who are accessing the critical resources are compliant with the modern technology platforms. So that's the mini project in itself where we need to run before implementing the passkeys. And user adoption is a big thing. Here in this case, the admin would say, I've been using my strong passwords and strong authentication to authenticate to the Entra ID. Why do I need to scan the QR code every time I'm accessing the Entra ID portal? That's the user adoption. And also sometimes admins not only access the systems with an interactive login, they sometimes also need to run a script behind with a PowerShell. How does that work is also a question for the user adaptation. Device management, of course, manage your tier 0, tier 1 managed accounts from the Intune or MDM solutions. Should we?
2 minutes. Okay.
Best practices for smooth passkey rollout. We built up a pilot where we only added the tier 0, tier 1 accounts to the security group of the Entra ID. It's running smooth without any questions from the tier 0 admins. Then gradually we are expanding that to the other tier 1 and tier 2 accounts with the lessons learned from the pilot group. Comprehensive support with the help desk that they will not be able to reset the passwords on their own, but they are not part of the SSPR group, but they should make a call to the help desk to reset the passwords. And also a continuous evaluation based on the Microsoft Defender and also Microsoft Identity Protection. I would stop here. Thank you for choosing this session over the other.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're a bit behind schedule, so yes, well done. So I suggest having the question over coffee a bit later. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to the speakers, and thank you very much for the logistics.